good afternoon in Scotland and the rest of UK. Good evening in Asia. I think it's good morning also to Ada, who's in the USA, and welcome to this event from the Asia Scotland Institute. My name is Martin Purbrick, and I'll moderate the discussion today. We go to a much nicer or much more friendly subject, I think, today than we normally do, talking about geopolitics or economics. And our focus today is a discussion of rugby in Asia. And the title of the event, Rugby in Asia, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and the Scottish Connection. And what a Scottish connection. Obviously, with Robbie McRobbie here with us today from Hong Kong, we will inevitably talk about the game of sevens, which was invented in Scotland, I'm glad to say. But not just talking about Scotland. And I think it's very important to look at how rugby can develop in Asia and how Asia can become a centre for rugby, which would be great for the game. Our guests today are two Scots. I think you're a Scot, Robbie. You'll be careful with the accent a bit later on. And also a Filipino-American, if I may say, Ada, all of whom have terrific leadership roles in rugby. Robbie McRobbie, MBE, is CEO of the Hong Kong Rugby Union. I would say a leader in the development of rugby in Asia. He's been active in that sport for many years. Studied history at the University of Oxford, after which Robbie joined the Royal Hong Kong Police, where our paths crossed in the 1990s. And I think that's where Robbie started to utilize sport as a social tool in his work with Operation Breakthrough, which is a fascinating youth program, which I hope Robbie will talk about a bit later, which was set up and run by Royal Hong Kong Police officers to help at-risk young people find meaning through sport. And a key part of that was rugby, as Robbie will tell us a little later. So Robbie has said that he became convinced that sport can be, and I quote, a powerful medium to tackle social issues and effect positive change. And from that belief, he drove the Sport for Development agenda with the Hong Kong Rugby Union, which I think, as we'll see, has been very successful. Most interestingly, he established a program for deaf rugby players, and the team competed in the first major international deaf rugby tournament in Australia in 2018. But really great to see that diversity that people like Robbie are building in the sport. Robbie and his family do hail from Scotland, and his father is just down the road from me in East Lothian. And coming to someone from a little bit further north, Ewan McIntosh, who's head coach of the China Women's Rugby Sevens team, graduated from the University of Edinburgh. Well done, Ewan, the best university in Scotland, I would agree with you, and went on to teach physical education and then coach rugby full-time. Ewan is helping the China Women's Sevens team prepare for the Tokyo Olympic Games, hopefully this year, where they will play against teams from leading rugby nations. And we really wish you well there. Ewan hails from Inverness, so obviously a far more, a real Highland Scot rather than us Southerners languishing in Edinburgh. And lastly, Ada Milby, President of the Philippine Rugby Football Union, the first woman to hold this role. Ada really is, I think, a well-recognized leader and role model for women in sport, not only rugby. She was confirmed to continue her role as the second woman on the new Asia Rugby Exco and as a World Rugby representative in her position of World Rugby Council member. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what she may be doing with World Rugby in the future with the Exco, which we expect to see your election result, Ada. She's also chairperson of the Women's Advisory Committee, working with 11 other Asian women to help develop the game. Asia continues to play at elite level, I should add, and I think in doing so illustrates the strength of women's rugby in Asia. But if before we go to the panelists, could we just show you a video from Hong Kong Rugby Union, which I think demonstrates some of the wider aspects of rugby in Asia. So I apologize, it's not a wider Asian video, it is from Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has done a great job of showing this diversity in rugby. So please take 2 minutes just to listen and watch. Robbie, mini rugby, youth rugby, sevens, 15s, women's rugby, a rugby team for deaf players. Is there anything you're not doing in the rugby world in Hong Kong? And really like to hear more about how you're developing the game. Over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, and I made the video myself. No, that's not true. Look, I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and in such exalted company. Not only am I, of the three guests, the worst rugby player, I've also got the least convincing Scottish accent, which is, even Ada's Scottish accent is better than mine. But it is, in fact, I was brought up in Gullen, and my father's still there, and I went to school at the Edinburgh Academy, which is probably the reason why the accent is a bit dodgy. But I'm still a proud Scot at heart, although I have been out in Hong Kong since 1992. So I thought perhaps I'd just give a wee bit of an overview of kind of rugby in this part of the world. And I think that even a keen rugby fan might be surprised to discover that there is really a rich history and culture of rugby in Asia, stretching right back to 1866, when Japan's Yokohama was the first club established. Not bad, considering that the English RFU wasn't formed until 1871, which was also coincidentally the year that rugby first appeared in India. The 2019 record-breaking Japan Rugby World Cup, which I'm sure probably Ada will talk more about, gave a glimpse of what Asia can bring to the table. And both in terms of the amazing organisation, the huge interest that it generated, not just across Asia but across the globe, the performance, of course, of the Japanese team, and the associated Impact Beyond grassroots program, which achieved an incredible 2.25 million new rugby participants across the region in the lead up to the World Cup. Already, there are actually 3 Asian countries in the top 20 in terms of registered rugby players, at least according to my extensive research, which consisted of reading the rugby paper. Japan at number 8 with 105,000 players, Sri Lanka at number 13 with 53,000, and China, thanks in no small part to Ewan's efforts, at number 16 with 35,000, which is actually just below Scotland at number 15 with 49,000. And that's hopefully just the tip of the proverbial rugby iceberg. 59.5% of the world's total population and the majority of the world's youth do live in Asia, with India boasting 356 million 10 to 24-year-olds, followed by China with 269 million. So I don't envy Ewan's selection policy. Whilst rugby has been played in Hong Kong since the 1880s, the Hong Kong Rugby Union, or Hong Kong Rugby Football Union, as it was then, wasn't actually established until 1952. Currently, we have around 10,000 registered rugby players of all ages from 4 to 64. The majority of our players are local Hong Kong Chinese, and we have made good inroads, I'm glad to say, into schools and universities. You saw a bit of that in the video there. We have programs in 260 local primary schools, over 100 secondary schools, and 24 colleges and universities, all running either touch or full contact rugby programs. The Hong Kong Rugby Union employs 90 full-time staff, 50 full-time professional men's and women's sevens players. It was, unfortunately, it was a few more than that prior to COVID, but still a fairly sizable rugby union, and we operate 2 sports grounds here in Hong Kong. Our representative teams have done well over the past few years, I'm delighted to say. Our women's 15s team played in the last World Cup in Ireland. The men's 15s team are reigning Asian champions, and they did make it through to the the previous World Cup repechage. Our men's sevens team won a gold medal at the last Asian Games, and both the men's and the women's teams are due to participate in the Olympic sevens repechage in Monaco in June. So hopefully one or maybe even both of them will make their way to Tokyo to join Ewan and the girls there. We also do have a very strong referees program. I should point out we will definitely have one representative at the Olympics. Matt Rodden, one of our referees, has already been announced as one of the match officials for the Olympics. In 2013, the Hong Kong Rugby Union, we set up our own charity, the Hong Kong Rugby Union Community Foundation, through which we operate our sport development programs. So, this was to a large extent born out of my experience with Operation Breakthrough. Operation Breakthrough, as Martin said, it was very interesting local charity here. It was set up back in the late 90s, and it was basically and continues to be run by retired and current police officers here, and it was born out of actually another Scottish link, a senior police officer here, Ian Seaborn, who was a district commander in Toon Moon, which was an area of Hong Kong. It's like a new town, very built up, very densely populated, large numbers of youngsters, and quite a high youth crime. The way in which the youth crime was being dealt with was a bit kind of cyclical. So the kids would be arrested if it was a minor crime. They'd be given a formal warning. They'd go back out on the streets. They were still kind of hanging with the same peer group. They'd be back in trouble. And you know, the rule was if they got 3 of these formal warnings, superintendent's discretion, as they were called, 3 strikes and they were out, and then they went into the juvenile justice system. And Ian felt that, you know, there must be a better way to address this. Now, whether or not this was kind of Ian thinking back to a bit of history from Glasgow, because Ian hails from Govan. He went to Govan High. So, you know, when you read the history about Glasgow in the 20s and the 30s, and the gang stuff that was going on there, it was interesting that to try and get kids off the street and get them engaged in snooker, darts, football, whatever it was, something to, you know, stop them getting into trouble. And Ian really ended up replicating something not too dissimilar. He took the first group of kids. He got some volunteer off-duty police officers. It was breaking down the barriers between the two. The kids were stopping seen as the police's enemy, and vice versa. The police were, you know, were starting to humanize their view of the kids. And after a number of these weekend camps, the youngsters actually took the initiative and approached Ian and said, look, could we do something on a more regular basis? And one of the activities that they had done over the weekends was boxing. So they started a little boxing class on the roof of Tai Hing police station. And again, funnily enough, another expatriate police officer, Danny Lawley, who previously served in the City of Edinburgh Police, he was one of the initiators, along with another expat cop, BJ Smith. And they started Operation Breakthrough Boxing. I kind of got involved helping put on boxing events, and in 2003, I suggested that, seeing as this model had worked so well at what is it, you know, particularly an individual sport, boxing, why not try it with a team sport? And we started Breakthrough Rugby. And now, all these years later, in fact, there are 10 different sports. There's dancing, there's judo, there's basketball, and there's lots of kids who are engaged and involved in the programs. And there's been some fantastic success stories on the back of this. In fact, 25 of the kids went on to become police officers. There's other that are working as social workers, as teachers. We have at Hong Kong Rugby Union, we have 4 every year that come through on an apprentice program. So Breakthrough, you know, was very successful. And I have to say, again, one final Scottish connection with it. So when Ian Seaborn actually retired, and Ian's back living in Edinburgh, He handed over the reins. The next chairman was another expat Scot, Mike Dowie. Sadly, the chairmanship has now fallen into the hands of an Englishman, Glenn O'Neill, but there is still a rich vein of Scottish influence flowing through Breakthrough. So the revenue that has enabled the Hong Kong Rugby Union to do all of these activities that I've described, not Operation Breakthrough, that's a separate charity, but all of our community foundation stuff and all the community work comes from the Cathay Pacific HSBC Hong Kong Rugby Sevens. 95% of our annual revenue is derived from that event. We normally host it every year in early April, although we haven't actually had one for 2 years now, thanks to the COVID. And we are due to host the next one on the 5th to 7th of November this year. The Sevens began in 1976, and it's grown over the years to become, I think I can say without boasting, it has become one of the world's best loved annual sports events. We've been sold out over the past decade with 120,000 coming through the turnstiles over 3 days every year. As well as the money that it generates for the rugby community, it has a huge positive impact on the Hong Kong economy. Over half of the spectators that come to the event fly in from overseas for the Sevens. So as you can imagine, the airlines, the hospitality trade, the bars, the restaurants, the hotels, the taxi drivers, everybody gets a bit of an uplift at Sevens time. We're also well known as well, of course, for the actual action on the pitch. That the Sevens is much more than that. It is kind of Mardi Gras. There's lots of iconic bits to the Sevens. The entertainment is very much part of that, and we've had some well-known acts over the years perform, including the Beach Boys, the Village People, David Hasselhoff, and the Proclaimers, which leads me neatly into my last theme, the rugby ties between Hong Kong and Scotland. As we all know, many Scots have played very important roles in the history of Hong Kong, and this very much includes its rugby history. Well-kent Scottish names jump out from the list of Union past chairmen: Henderson, McMeekan, Doherty, Stevenson, Watson, and Leckie. We have our own Exiles Club, Hong Kong Scottish, which is sister club to London Scottish and an associate member of the Scottish Rugby Union. We have Scots carefully placed in key positions throughout the Union. Former Scottish internationals Andy Hall and Sam Pinder run our performance and commercial departments respectively. And just like China, we've made sure that our women's Sevens program is coached by a Scot, Ian Monaghan. We enjoy a very warm relationship with Scottish Rugby, who have been extremely generous over the years in sharing their expertise with us. And every time that I'm back in Scotland visiting my old man in Gullen, I always receive a very warm welcome at Murrayfield and have the opportunity of catching up and picking the brains of Mark Dodson and everybody involved with the SRU, for which I'm very grateful, and obviously the free tickets to the games. Our 3 community foundation ambassadors are all former Scottish internationals with strong Hong Kong links. Jim Hamilton, quarter Chinese, and his mother was born in Hong Kong. Graham Morrison, born in Hong Kong, and his family, his mum and dad and brother still live here in Hong Kong. And John Barclay, the former Scottish captain, also born in Hong Kong, played his first rugby here. But the biggest link of all, as Martin mentioned, is of course the game of Sevens itself. Rugby Sevens was born in Scotland in 1883, the offspring of Ned Haig and David Sanderson to Melrose Butchers. In 1976, in Hong Kong, Ned's baby came of age, and in my opinion has never looked back. It is the world's biggest rugby party. The fancy dress, the legendary South Stand, where you can often see Ada in her latest fancy dress creation. The jugs of beer, Sweet Caroline. As they say, if you get bored, you can always turn around and watch the rugby. What would Ned think? I'm confident he would love every minute and be very proud, as am I, of this amazing sporting tie between Scotland and Hong Kong. I will finish, however, and I did do a bit of research for this, I promise you, and I came across an account of the one and only time that Hong Kong actually played Scotland in a men's international 15s test match, although our women did play some friendlies with Scotland in November 2019. But this is the account of the men's 15s match. The Scottish men's team toured Hong Kong in September 1977, beating the colony side 42-6. Contrary to the scoreline, however, Hong Kong kept Scotland in reach for most of the match, trailing only 15-6 at half-time. The match remained a close affair until the Scots pulled away with a 4-try blitz in the last 20 minutes. The game was particularly special for former Scottish international Mike Smith, who actually played for Hong Kong against his former side. Unfortunately, his experience could not prevent the try frenzy that was started off by Scottish stars Keith Robertson and prop Ian Mighty Mouse McLaughlin. Despite the last few minutes, Hong Kong could take some positives away from the match, with local press reports calling their performance credible against obviously more fit and well-drilled opponents. And on that, back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Robbie. I think you've highlighted the links between the game of rugby in Asia and Scotland very well. It's not surprising that Scots dominated the game of rugby in Hong Kong, as they're also in charge of the Royal Hong Kong Police and in charge of most of the Hong Kong government for most of its history. So it's not in the slightest bit surprising to hear your account. I think you're a wee bit modest about your own playing career. I do recall in the 90s, I think you went on every Royal Hong Kong Police rugby tour. So I'm sure you must have been a very good player on tour. But
I don't think I'll comment on that, Martin. You were right. I was a very keen tourist. Yeah, I think it was possibly more off the pitch attributes that got me the touring places rather than my skills.
It's your leadership skills.
My
Rob.
leadership, yes, that's exactly.
Very grateful to you for that. And onto leadership skills. It's terrific to see a Highlander leading as coach the China women's sevens team, and really hoping that you do well in Japan, Ewan. Can you talk us through what are you doing now? How's the team doing, and where are you going next?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for inviting us on here. It's a great opportunity, as Robbie said, to just promote what's actually happening in Asia and the rugby world at the moment. So for us, obviously, very exciting times. We're on our last 3 months to the date. Yeah, 3 months to the date from when we'll kick off in the Tokyo Olympics. So there's not a long road to go, but simply we've the journey started for me back in 2019 March. We came in and we were asked to try and obviously qualify for the Olympics back in 2019. At that point, I first came into the country as an assistant coach from New Zealand. I was coaching over in New Zealand for a couple of years, and Sean Horan, the former New Zealand Black Ferns head coach, he and I were working together in the Bay of Plenty. We came over to China, and that was our first initial challenge, was try and qualify. If we didn't qualify, we wouldn't have been here for very long after that. So that was a little bit of performance pressure. Robbie will remember it was a pretty. Hong Kong did really well in that tournament, and we managed to pull away a bit in the second half. But it was a pretty positive and successful tournament for us overall. Just going on that, since that point, we actually went over to New Zealand. We were invited into the Hamilton Sevens last year for January, so January 2020, Hamilton Sevens in the World Series. We left China in December, and we went over there. Originally, we were supposed to only be there until the start of February, but then COVID hit, and we actually got stuck in New Zealand until the end of March. At that point, it was a bit of a, as everybody's had, a bit of a rocky journey with regards to the plans and what was going to happen with national programs and even the Olympics. But we came back to Hainan Island off the south coast of China from New Zealand. But at that point, we had 6 foreign staff, but only 2 of us actually came back with the team into China. myself and an assistant S&C, and we were based down in Hainan for a few months. We moved back up. We don't actually have a full-time base in China for rugby, so we rent mainly soccer bases. And we were, I think we've actually, since we came back into the country, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're in our sixth base in a year. So get an opportunity to travel around the country a little bit, but which has its positives. But then from the stability of a training environment has its negatives. Sadly, Sean couldn't continue with the team due to family commitments from October last year, and I got offered the head coaching role. So I've been the head coach since October last year, which again has been a great opportunity for myself and challenge. So we've just moved back from Hainan Island again to the mainland in Nanjing. And as I said, we're pretty much in our last 2-month training block here, and we hope to be going to Japan at the start of July.
Ewan, before we move across to Ada, could you tell us a bit more about the team, the China Women's Sevens team, and if you've met them, the wider squad and the 15s, where do they come from? How do women come from? How have your team come through the game? How have they reached this level? What's sort of the background of most of your players?
There's quite a mix. We've got, from what I understand, there's 12 provinces that have pretty much full-time rugby players. So their program is built from their provincial setup, and obviously every year they have 2 big provincial tournaments every year, and that's where basically the national team gets selected from. So we had the squad that we had together from qualification, and then from Hamilton Sevens, we had a squad of 20 athletes. And when we came back in, obviously we were under restrictions in COVID, but they opened up their provincial tournaments at the end of last year. And the last one was in December in Guangzhou. And that's where, again, from a national point of view, we go and get the opportunity to select those players from. So we selected another 10 players in January, bumped our squad up to 30. And then since then have reduced it down, and we're back down to 19 athletes at the moment. But majority of all of those players come through the provincial setup. From a grassroots point of view, I think rugby is still very, very young here, and a lot of our athletes start other sports, and then maybe it's a bit varied, but roughly kind of 15, 16, if they maybe get pulled across to different sports or haven't been as successful as they'd hoped in different sports. So that's probably puts where rugby is on the hierarchy of the sporting system over here at the moment, but that's what we're obviously hoping to change long term after Tokyo, is that then if people actually get exposure to the game, that hopefully filters down to the grassroots side of things.
I do recall many years ago, and I think Robbie will remember this as well, many of the teams we saw in Hong Kong coming from mainland China started with the PLA, People's Liberation Army. They used to come and compete, I think in the 10s, Robbie, annually. Are there any links between the PLA and the development of rugby in China?
Well, you're absolutely right, Martin. In fact, the PLA were the first team to play in China. Rugby was introduced to them by George Simpkin, who was the Hong Kong coach at the time, who sadly passed away last year. In his fact, there's a memorial service for him 15th of May. So George was really the kind of the father of rugby in China. The PLA took to it. They actually played in our domestic league for years. We used to help support them coming down every Saturday to play in the league, and they were very good. And they were for the period when China was actually kind of putting some emphasis on the 15s game. They were making up often a significant number of the national 15s team. They've now the PLA rugby team were based across the border in Guangzhou. That is now stopped, but President Chen, who's the main man in China Rugby, Ewan's boss, he has got a plan to try and get rugby now, rather than just be one PLA rugby team. He's looking to get rugby across the PLA, which would be incredible. I mean, that would be the world's biggest rugby club if he gets that going. So in simple answer, they were hugely important right at the start. They've remained important up until fairly recently. They're off the radar at the moment, but fingers crossed they might well come back.
We wish you every success in Tokyo. I hope you get there. And obviously, the reason for success is not just wanting you to win, but I think, as Robbie pointed out, if you do win, then it's going to be a huge boost for rugby in China. So, very best wishes and good luck. And staying with women's rugby and how important that is, Ada, could you talk to us about what you're doing? How are you developing women's rugby in Asia, and what are you doing next?
Sure. I wanted to say thanks first off to Robbie for that big history lesson. Actually, before today's chat, I thought that the biggest contribution from Scottish rugby was your loss to Japan in 2019 World Cup to give us the first Asian team in the quarterfinal. But so no, I think it's really tremendous to see how strong that connection is, and to see, the knock-on effect, the ripple effect of the involvement of, everyone from Scotland, and your involvement within Asia has really been tremendous. Obviously, from the Hong Kong side, Robbie, all the work that you're doing within Asia and Philippines, with the charities. We've got the Potbelly Pigs, which I think has a strong Scottish connection as well. And we are we're a direct beneficiary of the charity work that's done there. We are in a really different position than Hong Kong and even in China. We basically had one rugby club for about 100 years or so, and then we went from one club that was a primarily expat club to about 25 clubs now in a span of 25 years. So we're really, we're promoting it, we're working hard, but we're just in a very different, we don't have all these commercial assets yet. We're really very much still in our grassroots development stages, but working really hard to try and get to the spaces like Hong Kong, and to, be able to match. We only nearly lost to you in the qualifiers, Robbie, to get to the Olympics repechage. So next year, how much time? Okay, we'll get there. As far as what we're doing in Asia, of course, Robbie alluded to the fact that we had the most successful Rugby World Cup ever. 4.3 billion pounds were raised. So it was the most economically successful Rugby World Cup. Some of the knock-on effects of that, I don't know if you've just seen in the news that Asahi Superdry is now going to be one of the commercial partners for 2023, which is, fantastic to see the reach of 2019 being able to expand into the next Rugby World Cup. I think it really shows the global reach of the new emerging markets, which is going to be really crucial sort of to future-proofing rugby. As Robbie said earlier, that we've got 60% of the world's population here. So we would be very remiss to overlook Asia as a key market moving forward to the growth of Asia, or to the growth of global rugby. We've also got the most number of member unions that are growing in Asia. So we've got small unions like Bangladesh and Palestine that have just recently joined the ranks. And we've got other unions that are rising through the World Rugby ranks like Laos, Lebanon, and Iran. Moving into the social impact stuff, same as what Hong Kong is doing, which again, they're just such a leader in this space. I always really look up to what they do and how they lead Asia, in what they do. And in the social impact space, I'm really excited to talk about the partner from 2019, which was Child Fund, Pass It Back. It's a really incredible story if you have the opportunity to read about them. It was basically this program, the Sport for Development program, that was started in this very, very small village in Laos. And, it became a global partner for World Rugby that ended up raising, I think, £2 million to be able to develop more grassroots programs within Asia. So I also think that Laos is the only country that I'm aware of in the world where the sport is actually seen as a girl's sport and not a boy's sport. And again, it kind of goes back to the opportunities that we have, because rugby is not really well known, because it's an emerging market, we have the opportunity to build it however we want it to. So we don't have to build rugby as a boys sport. We can build rugby as a sport for all, and truly a sport for girls, boys, women, men. So I'm really, really excited about that opportunity. And we're seeing that in how we develop our committees. We've just doubled the number of women on our Asia Rugby Exco recently, which was exciting. And we also have the largest women's advisory committee, the largest committee in all of Asia, with the intent of making sure that we can integrate more of these women across all of our committees with the goal of making the committee obsolete. That's the ultimate goal of the Women's Advisory Committee, is we want to be obsolete, because we want to normalize women's involvement in all aspects of the game. Where else? Of course, again, we've got the 3 legs of the HSB series here in Asia, which I think that demonstrates World Rugby's, they see that there's real opportunity here if we can tap into it. And I really think we've got some powerhouses coming up, like China, like India, like Sri Lanka. And I think with the right investments, we're going to see some of these teams knocking at the top tier doors very, very, very soon.
Ada, that's not only fascinating, but absolutely inspiring, frankly. It's really terrific to hear what you're doing with your colleagues in the development of rugby. Let's not say men's rugby and women's rugby, let's just say rugby.
Rugby.
Very, very exciting. And perhaps just staying with Asian culture, I'd just like to ask you a question from Takaoka-san, one of our Japanese friends, who has put a question forward, and he's asked, although Asian culture is clearly diverse, do you find any aspect of Asian culture which can be useful in developing a strong rugby team and supportive rugby culture? Anything that springs to mind from rugby as a game and that lends itself with what you're doing in Asia to bringing people together?
I'd say that kind of region wide, you'd see that the discipline that a lot of Asians have, that is really, really useful when you're trying to build team culture. You don't have sort of the kids kind of knocking off to say, oh, I've got this other thing or that other thing. I mean, when you're committed to something, you are committed to it and you're disciplined. I mean, you saw it with the Japan men's rugby team when Eddie Jones came in, and he just basically transformed the team because he just drilled them, and that culture of discipline allowed them to rise because they weren't willing to focus on anything else. They were singularly focused, and I think that was not something that is just a Japan specific culture. I think that's Asia wide.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we can take a little bit of that back to Scotland now as well, to help our own team improve. Although I'm very pleased to say this year it was quite a Six Nations for Scotland. Sadly, they didn't make the Grand Slam, but what a terrific performance from the team. And maybe just to ask the next question, if we could bring on former Scottish international Scott Hastings, who I watched play in when I was at university in the 1980s, and with his brother Gavin, of course. Scott, I know you've posted a question. Would you like to come on?
Great to see you guys. Thanks, Ewan and Ada, for your input. My question was very much towards Robbie and the future relationship he has with the Chinese government, and how he intends to sort of improve that in light of the political stance and the influence of the Chinese government on Hong Kong. But more importantly, do you see your collaboration and partnership with other Asian countries, and in particular into China, and how influential can you be to grow the game? Because ultimately, that is what World Rugby is trying to do. They're trying to grow the game, trying to get the numbers. So as Ada said, if we can get the numbers up, then you can compete on the 7s and then compete on the 15s. As we've seen Japan, their breakthrough has been phenomenal. And unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has had an impact upon that growth. But it is proven that it can happen. So it's important, with such a population sitting on your doorstep, how do you see those influences happening, and how crucial is the Hong Kong Rugby Football Union in influencing that process?
Thanks, Scott. Good to see you too. Your hair's looking nice. Yeah, look, Hong Kong, as I mentioned before, Hong Kong, right from the start of the development of rugby in China, has played a really key role, and we've had a close relationship with the CRFA, with the China Rugby Union. We've brought down players in the past from China to spend seasons with our clubs. We put them through coaching courses, refereeing courses, English courses. We've always had interaction with clubs playing The Hong Kong club's going up to China, and China club's coming down. Yeah, I mean, we remain close friends with them. Interestingly, so Ewan actually, as he mentioned, his route to China came through Bay of Plenty. Bay of Plenty also have a very close relationship with China Rugby Union, and we've just signed an MOU with the Bay of Plenty. So that there's this kind of triangular thing between ourselves, the Bay of Plenty, and the China Rugby Union that we're very keen to develop going forward. Specifically for us, a huge area of interest is the Greater Bay Area. So this is it's an integration, an economic and social integration initiative which the China, Hong Kong, and Macau governments are behind. It's the 11 cities in the southern tip of Guangdong province, including Hong Kong and Macau, being brought closer together. Now, for us, the exciting thing about that is it brings together 70 million people. The Hong Kong's population is 7, but 70 million in terms of the opportunities, the customer base, the development. As you can imagine, Scott, I mean, that for us is if we can get in there and do a good job, that's a game changer. The interesting thing as well, there's lots of Scottish schools up there. Merchiston are up there. I think Stuart's Melville are up there. Fetties. So you know, again, there's a really interesting Scottish link with what's going on in the Greater Bay Area. The last thing I would say is that I think World Rugby have perhaps not used the Hong Kong Rugby Union enough in terms of what they have tried to do with China. If I'm being honest, there's nobody that knows China Rugby better than the Hong Kong Rugby Union. We're sitting on the doorstep. We've always had engagement with them. We know them very well. We know the personalities. We know the individuals. So you know, we're a great resource to be used to help promote and develop the game and you know, deliver what World Rugby are trying to do. Does that kind of cover it? I must add one more thing, Martin, just while Scott's on. So I mentioned about the fact there was a Hong Kong Scottish club in Hong Kong. That, I have to say, was the brainchild of Scott's rather less handsome brother, Gavin.
I'm sure it was Scott's idea, though.
Probably.
Yes. But Scott, while you're on, Scott, did you play in Asia or Hong Kong?
Yeah, yes, I did. I had many exciting trips to Hong Kong, playing the Hong Kong Sevens and also the Tens. And I've had the pleasure of commentating at the Hong Kong Sevens. It's the most fabulous tournament. And I just love the fact that people in Hong Kong are so passionate. And within Asia, they're so passionate about the rugby. And I look on with a bit of jealousy that passion is sometimes not shared here in Scotland. Undoubtedly there's passion, but people are happy enough to point fingers and criticise the Scottish Rugby Union. And of course, numbers have kind of dwindled a wee bit, and I'm concerned about the game going forward and how the clubs interact with the professional teams and how the professional teams interact with the communities and back into Scotland. And undoubtedly, for me, there's a big focus on the professional game, but there's not on the numbers game. And I suppose that's where I look upon the work that's been done in Asia. Undoubtedly, it's the grassroots that is ultimately the focus. But there are platforms there, of course, like the Sevens and the international Asian tournaments to drive the game forward. But you know, when Robbie starts talking about the access to 70 million people and that dialogue already happening, that's exciting to be involved in. I'm sure you and Ada are right involved in that. So thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed listening in.
Thank you very much, Scott. We have another question from the audience. Steve Noble, at grassroots level, there are many encouraging programs across Asia. Scott alluded to that as well. I mean, obviously there's a lot of programs across a lot of diverse aspects of the sport. What elite level or pro level aspirations can players have in Asia outside of Japan or Hong Kong? But maybe bring Ewan back on first. Ewan, I know you've not been in Asia for that long, and but your own perspective of where does rugby go next with this growing grassroots rugby across many countries in Asia? Where do you think it can go next at the elite level?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think obviously, as you were saying, and Scott touched on there with regards to the number of potential athletes that could be involved in this game over the next few years. And as I said, from our point of view, just purely from a China side of things, if things go well here and we really open up people's eyes to the sport, and the sport itself has got very many variations, as Robbie's video earlier showed. It's got huge potential. I think then looking more to the elite side of it, the connections there that Robbie mentioned with to the Bay of Plenty. I know that with the Rapid Rugby, there was a connection with the CRFA and the Bay of Plenty around the Rapid Rugby side of things. But I guess looking big picture, it would be great to see a professional league within Asia itself. Whether that's cross country, whether it's trying to join what Japan obviously have got a huge amount of success in their professional leagues there. But I guess for me, the ultimate thing would be there was cross connections between those countries. And if right now we know that Japanese are obviously quite far ahead of other countries with regards to professional rugby, but if those other countries can catch up, that would be great to see a professional league across the countries.
Yeah. Actually, there was a good article that I think we published on the Asia Scotland Institute website from former Wallabies player calling for more Australian players to go to Japan to play professional rugby. So maybe that's part of the future growth as well. More non-Asian players coming into leagues as they professionalize across the region. Perhaps that would help, especially with business taking an interest in the game as well. I mean, clearly, Robbie, you've got that with the Hong Kong Sevens, significant sponsorship from flagship partners. Perhaps we need that from business in other parts of the game. Can you see that developing in any other competitions across Asia?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think the problem that we have to reference Steve's point is unless we find an outlet for the elite end of the game, we're going to get left behind in Asia. The problem is World Rugby now have been very supportive, and they have, so South America, there is a competition there, so all the best players in Uruguay and Chile and Brazil, and 4 teams out of Argentina are playing together. Major League Rugby in the US and Canada. Russia's got a professional league that's well established in Europe, obviously. Now World Rugby funding Fiji and Samoa to play in New Zealand Super Rugby. So we're the only, Japan to one side, and unfortunately it's very difficult for us to get a team into the Japanese league. So ourselves, the Koreans, the Malaysians, the Philippine team, China, where do we go and play? Global Rapid Rugby was brilliant for us. There was the Hong Kong South China Tigers team. There was the China Lions, which was Bay of Plenty and China Rugby Union. There was the Valky playing out of Malaysia. It was the first opportunity we really had to have a viable professional club competition. Unfortunately, Andrew Forrest, Twiggy Forrest, who bankrolled it, bless him, he did a wonderful thing. But when Western Forces team got back into Australian Super Rugby, that's where his focus was. So that competition has fallen over now, and it's left a massive void. And I've got to be honest, I can't see where the opportunity is going to come from. But if we don't find it, then we are going to get left behind.
How about the women's game, Ada? I mean, back to you on. I'm sorry to sort of dwell on women's rugby. As we said, we'll just call it rugby. But can the women's game help promote rugby growth across Asia?
Absolutely. I think that because the women's game is younger globally, the gap is not as wide. The divide is not as big as the men's game. So you'll see countries like India who have strategically put more emphasis on their women's national teams because they realize that the divide is, the gap to jump it is much smaller, and they have a much better chance of having a top tier women's team than they do their men's team at this stage. I think that having the newly approved global calendar for the women's 15s program has been tremendous, and really, really hoping that we can find a path forward for the global men's 15s game, because it's really, really important that there is a clear pathway for these regions and these unions to be able to say, okay, this is how we get there. At the moment, it's a little bit fractured, and of course, there's lots of challenges with scheduling and calendars, But yeah, I think with the women's game, definitely, it's really interesting because you're seeing all these sort of equity investments going around with the different unions and different assets, commercial assets, and in Asia we don't have any of those assets, so we're kind of in search for an angel investor who can see the potential of what we've got and see and recognize that we've got Malaysia and Philippines, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Japan, Sri Lanka, all these countries. We've got the potential. We just need someone to get us started.
Well, with the number of growing firms companies in Asia that are becoming multinationals, you'd think that's the place to go for an angel investor, isn't it? It's there should be. I think traditionally rugby's looked at these sort of large Western firms. If you think of the sponsors of the Sevens, but there's some great Asian companies that I think would be nice to see them taking an interest in rugby as promoting themselves. And in terms of promotion, could I just pass across to Roddy, our chairman of the Asia Scotland Institute? I think Roddy wants to ask a question about the wider aspects of the game.
Thanks. Thank you all for a really, really interesting talk. I'm always intrigued, as I was saying earlier on, about the way in which sport links different countries and cultures together. And I just wondered how well spread rugby is throughout the Commonwealth countries, which obviously include many countries in Africa as well as Asia. And I'm thinking of the success of cricket as a sport amongst Commonwealth countries. Is there a chance for rugby to follow that route?
I'll maybe have first shot at that. Yeah, I mean, there is a similar pattern. I mean, I think if you I mean, you'll have seen with the Commonwealth Games when it was in Glasgow, and the rugby, I believe, was at Ibrox, was it? Is that what I'm saying? And then next year, the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. It's very widespread amongst the Commonwealth countries. Even the countries who you won't maybe see, who are maybe not playing that quite high level, as Ada referred to a little bit before, the likes of India, Pakistan, rugby is very well established. It's there in the military, in the police, which is, it is a lot of that is the sort of the heritage from the colonial days. Sri Lanka is obviously huge. Malaysia, so it's got a very strong root because of the Commonwealth history, and as I say, particularly because of the way in which it got embedded within the military and within the police. I mean, I remember going on, so before '97, we went on our last Royal Hong Kong Police rugby tour, and we played against the Royal Singapore Police and the Royal Thai Police and the Royal Malaysian Police, and there was still very much, apart from Thailand, obviously aren't in the Commonwealth, but the point I'm making is, that heritage and tradition and culture was very much there.
I have one final question from the audience, which is Jenna, who's over at Qatar Airways. Jenna, I don't think the panel can help you with this, but I'll ask anyway. Can the Asia teams help the Scottish Sevens return to Edinburgh again, especially now there is a new smaller Edinburgh Rugby Stadium available? I think there's always a rivalry between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and I think if we ask our Asian friends to step into that rivalry, it might get you into trouble. But I wanted to mention it anyway. Jenna from Qatar Airways, thank you very much. Robbie, go on.
Oh, I think what we can say is that Ada can sort out the Philippine team, and Ewan can sort out the China team, and I'll sort out the Hong Kong team. Jenna, if you can get us to the Melrose Sevens, which is what I don't know whether that's what you're referring to, or any Sevens in Edinburgh or Glasgow, we'd be delighted to come.
Delighted.
Sort out the airfares, we'll be there.
Jenna Donaldson, there's a big smile come up in the message, so challenge accepted. I think you've got 3 teams ready to fly. But thank you, Jenna. We'll get back to you about that. It's a good idea.
And Ada will play as well.
You could play as well, Robbie. You can get your boots on. You'll be fine. I better stop there and really thank Robbie McRobbie, Ewan McIntosh, Ada Milby. Fascinating insights and showing how strongly the game is developing in Asia. Could I just hand back to Roddy, our chairman, for closing words? Over to you, Roddy.
webinar possible. It's a really, really interesting subject, and a lot of younger people are getting engaged with rugby, and I do think that the example that the three of you are setting in the things that you're doing are frankly inspirational. And I think the world would be a better place if more people played sports together. And I'm hopeful that this very interesting webinar will do something to advance that as a concept. So thank you, everybody, very much. And Ada can go to sleep now, right? And sleep through tomorrow. And Robbie and Ewan, thanks to both of you as well for your contribution.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys.